it's my turn to formally get things started. So thanks all for turning up today for our webinar on branding in corporate learning. I'm Martin Cousins. I'm going to be your host, and we've got John Helmer with us, as you will see. We've got our microphones off, so we'll just do everything in chat. And let me just go through a couple of housekeeping things. Hopefully you found the chat, and also, can you, if you're answering, can you or have anything to say, can you just make sure it goes to everyone? Because in previous webinars, sometimes the comment has gone to just the panel. So John will introduce himself in a minute, but he's got a lot of experience around marketing, communication, and brand. So this is really an opportunity to pick his brains, as well as to kind of hear what he has to say on the subject. But that's how we're going to use chat. So hopefully you've all found that. So I'm going to quickly ask John just to give us a couple of minutes of who you are.
Who am I? Good question. Well, I've been 20 years in learning technologies. I realized recently, had a count up and was quite shocked. But altogether 30 years in marketing. Started off my marketing career in a West End advertising agency, Young and Rubicam. And I've done bits of PR, but mostly been heads of marketing jobs for learning vendor companies. And then a lot of consultancy, which kind of involved both sides of the fence, but again, mostly vendor. So I've seen my job increasingly over the last 10 years or so in talking to both sides, both workplace learning professionals and vendor organizations, and trying to get the two sides to understand each other through a lot of what's grandly called thought leadership, white papers, think tank, dinner events, discussion forums, workshops, and organizing events, conferences, and at one point editing a magazine. And now I'm a podcaster. I just launched my podcast this week, which I will plug, I'm afraid, relentlessly later. So that's me.
Okay, brilliant. So great to have you here, John. And with all that experience, I'm sure you're going to provide some very useful insight for everyone. Before we get into it, I would just like to ask everyone, what would make this a successful webinar for you? Put that into the chat. So that the aim of that question is to hopefully give you what you need today, and also potentially to keep John on the straight and narrow. So if you have got some answers for us, let's see. I'll give you a couple of minutes. What would make this work for you? Where is everyone? Is everyone going to say anything?
Perhaps they're happy with the initial brief you've already given there, Martin.
I'm happy to progress on that assumption. So what I'm going to do is I am going to remove my video. So now you should only see John, and we are going to crack on. So John, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. So first of all, I'd like you to think back to the first school you attended, and I'd like you to ask yourself this question. If you could advance the slide, Martin. Think about those lovely school photos we all took back from school, or if you're a parent, you now get back very much in the similar kind of form. But think back to the first school you attended. See how many of your classmates you can bring to mind. Now, this is interesting for me because I attended a reunion at the weekend with a load of people I'd been at secondary school with. But I think back to primary school, and even at that reunion, I say there was a couple of people there I just didn't know from Adam, just couldn't remember them at all. But if I think back to my primary school, which now is kind of like vanishingly long ago, I'm sorry to say, there's not many people I can remember. So, Martin, if I ask you the question, how many people could you remember from your primary school?
Probably about half a dozen. I'm lucky in the fact that two of my closest friends are from primary school, so we've stayed in touch. But actually, there are two or three that really stand out for different reasons. But apart from that, I probably couldn't. Yeah, it's all a bit vague. So I would reckon about half a dozen people.
Yeah, I think it's probably the same for most people. And it'll be small numbers. I mean, some people have that kind of weird memory where they remember every single person and every single name, but that's quite unusual. What you tend to find is that people remember like the class clown, the person who everybody loved because they told jokes and disrupted everything, or maybe the class bully, the person who took their pocket money off them, or someone whose parents were incredibly rich, richer than everybody else is, or somebody who just seemed to be a lot poorer than anybody else and unfortunate sort of people. You might remember the first friend you made, or you might remember the friend you had to say goodbye to on the last day of school, which happened to me because their parents were emigrating to Australia. But in each case, there is an effective trigger that has made them stick in your memory. And it's probably going to be something like this. It's simple. With a class clown, you kind of boil that person down to just one attribute. He or she made me laugh, or they just disrupted things. It was a simple thing. It was the person with the outrageous quiff or whatever. Or it was something extreme, as I said, extremes of wealth or poverty, or somebody who is physically very different. In my case, I had sticky out ears, so people tend to remember that. Funny name, so people called me Helmet. There was something singular about that person. The person who'd been homeschooled and arrived 2 years later than everybody else, or else the first person you met, or the last person you met. And these are all kind of effective triggers that stick people in our minds. And brands are like this. Brands stick in your mind because you've got some sort of effective relationship with them. Now, effective relationship, it's kind of a posh psychological way of basically saying that you have some kind of emotional feeling towards them. So if I say the word Trump, some people might swing their MAGA badges around and clench their fists in the air, and other people might feel a bit sick at the stomach. But all these brands like Amazon, Apple, Ferrari, Nike, the BBC, McDonald's, the Beatles, the Ku Klux Klan, when someone says those names, the chances are you get a little flash of some trace emotion every time, positive or negative. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but something fires off in your brain when you hear that word. And that little flash of feeling, what's it about? Well, one thing it's not about is design. The brand is not the logo. We say this again and again and again, but it's very important. So when you're driving along the motorway and you see the golden arches come up, you might salivate like some Pavlovian dog, or feel sick to your stomach, or feel angry about the deforestation of the Amazon. But it's not down to that particular shade of yellow, or even because the shape of the logo makes you think of your mama. We can go to the next slide. There have been some interesting articles recently about that design. It's not a design thing. The logo reminds you of experiences you've had with that brand in the past and the way it's made you feel. Because as people who have read Nick Shackleton-Jones's book will realize, we don't remember facts or information. We remember how we felt about those things, and brand very much participates in that logic. So the logo stands for the brand, it points to the brand, but it isn't the brand. So if that's the case, what is the brand? So I'm going to give you a couple of definitions now. One from a historical brand guru, David Ogilvy, who founded the agency Ogilvy and Mather, which was the deathly competitor to the one that I did my marketing apprenticeship, so to speak, in. And he said, you now have to decide what image you want for your brand. Image means personality. Products, like people, have personalities, and they can make or break them in the marketplace. And now if we're going to give somebody a bit more up to date, Seth Godin, it's really of our own age, he says this: People don't buy goods and services. They buy relations, stories, and magic. And to me, they're essentially saying basically the same thing, although it's expressed in different terms, that a brand has a personality. A brand is a kind of a fictional character, something that has the attributes of a person in the way that it affects us, but it's not a person. It's, unless it's Trump, it's a company, and there is a relationship and a personality. So it's a slightly mysterious thing. That. So how do you work with that? How does this information help if you're actually working with brand? If you want to create one, or if you want to maintain one, or indeed if you want to reanimate a tired brand, which often happens. Well, I think you've got to look at brand in two basic ways. It's complicated stuff, but this is simplifying it. If you look from the inside out and from the outside in, I want to start with the outside in, because one of the things you're always trying to do with brand is to put yourself in the shoes of your target decision maker, or the person who encounters your brand. So if we look at it from the outside in, the important thing here is, in marketing, people talk about touch points. But more recently, it's become common to talk about moments of truth. So at each of these touch points, which could be, I don't know, you see a poster, you see a billboard, an advert, in terms of a B2B brand, which most learning vendor brands are, you might go to an exhibition and see an exhibition stand. You might talk to a salesperson. They might give you a business card. You might get a squeezy stress ball from them, or a USB drive, or something like this. Each of these is a touch point. And Moments of Truth says that where these things are in any way transactional, that is an important point in a person's journey, relationship with the brand. So for instance, if you download a white paper because you're interested in something like learning experience papers or whatever, what's your experience like when you do that? How well does the work? How quickly does the website load? How easy is the experience for you? How much does what you get live up to the promise? That's a moment of truth. That's a moment where you establish the truth about this person. Is it kind of liar, liar, pants on fire? That wasn't what I was expecting to get, and now I've got loads of spam. Or is it, yep, that took me seconds. It solved a problem for me. I like this company. I feel I want to give them a bit more attention. Now, there's also a thing which is this peculiar word on the slide here, ZMOTS, which is the zero moment of truth. This is something that came in with that Google talks about in their digital learning for digital marketing people. And it's to do with the world we live in now, where something like 80% of our experience with a brand we have before they even know that we're thinking about them. So you might be searching for, the example that Seth Godin gives is, you're a supplier of fishing tackle, and somebody is searching for bass. Well, they might be searching for bass, they might be searching for bass, they might be a musician. But then if they say, they start searching for bass fishing, that brings them a bit closer to you. And if they say search for equipment for bass fishing, then suddenly they're within your funnel, as marketers call it. They're getting to be in your target market, but still you haven't had any encounter with them. So what ZMOT says is that your brand has to be there in the zero moment of truth before you even know that they're starting to think about contacting you. And increasingly, this is the focus of a lot of marketing, is to be there. So to relate this to learning, a lot of people now are using bots to drive people to their LMS or to their LXP. And there's a lot of talk of integration with bots with platforms like Slack, or with SharePoint or Microsoft Teams. So the idea of that is people wanting to be where the learners are. And this is a zero moment of truth. So before they've even decided to contact the learning department, before you even know about it, there's a potential that they're expressing desire and intent to learn something, and that's the zero moment of truth. So that kind of relates how brand can work in a learning context. So how is the brand getting transmitted? If you're ever wondering why marketing people are such control freaks, it's because these moments of truth and touch points happen at so many different places within an organization. It might be someone you meet, and so much of this is out of control of marketing people, because it's the job of marketing to make sure that every one of these little moments of truth goes well. And the truth is that there's an awful lot going on in most organizations that marketing doesn't have much control over, and it drives them mad. And the situation is getting worse and worse year on year. We used to say the organization was an iceberg. 9/10 or 8/9 of it is underwater, and the bit that actually people see is a relatively tiny proportion of that. And what happened in the old days was there was a little trap door between the lower bit of the iceberg and the upper bit of the iceberg, and marketing controlled that. It controlled what came through to public view. But nowadays, if we move on to the next slide, we're in the horrible situation for a control freak marketing person that the bottom end of the iceberg is almost more visible, because everybody in your organization, whoever they are, however they're engaged or disaffected, is tweeting, they're on Facebook, they're on Instagram. Everybody is a publisher, and the whole of your organization is publishing, and it's extraordinarily difficult to control that. The marketing person can't go around to everybody's desk, look over their shoulder and see who what they're tweeting about on Facebook, what they're putting on Glassdoor, and so on. So how do you control that position? Well, the answer is that you can't really, but you have to look at, and this is where it comes in, that you have to look at brand from an inside out perspective. So everybody in your organization has to be reflecting the brand. So in order to do that, they've got to live the brand. So in order to do that, they've got to know what the brand is about. And the important core of that is purpose. As an organization, even as a small organization, you have to know what you're for and who you're for. Who is your target decision maker? Are you for learning and development managers, learning and development directors, HR directors? This is standard marketing stuff. Everybody spends a lot of time kind of doing personas and working out who their decision maker is. The next step beyond that is, what can you offer these people in terms of value and benefits, and how do they experience those, and how do those things matter to them? So everybody in your organization has to know what that purpose is, and they also have to know what your values are. And if you wonder why there have been so many of these kind of initiatives within organizations over the last 10 years or so, it's because of the bottom end of the iceberg situation, that marketing can't control everything. The only way you can do it is to make sure that everybody is speaking and living the brand. And it really does make a difference when you go into, I walk into a lot of organizations, and I can tell you, some of them, everybody that talks to me reflects that brand. And in others, almost nobody does. And it's really stark, that difference. So our purpose is kind of who you're for, what you can do for them, what the main value is. Values is, in a way, is a slightly different thing. It's, we'll do anything for you as a company, but there are some things that we won't do. So this is kind of the meatloaf moment. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. And if we can move on to the next slide. Here he is in all his glory. So are you an ethical firm? Are you a Marmite brand, i.e. we accept not everyone's going to like us, but that those that do like us will love us? I mean, your values is where you differentiate yourself from others. It's about negatives as much as it is about positives. We're this, we're not that. I would do anything to make a buck, but I won't do that. So differentiation is absolutely the key in marketing, and purpose and values is what you differentiate about. Now, there's been a ton written about differentiation, how important it is. So I'm not going to go on too much about it. I just want to point out some of the dangers of not differentiating. If you look at this slide, there are a million other brands out there jostling for attention. If you're a learning vendor company, you're in there somewhere, but we can hardly see you. I think as I look around, a couple that I've worked for kind of stand up, a couple stand out, a couple that are defunct, but that's only because I know them. There is a danger with any brand that it kind of disappears into this background as far as the buyer's concerned. There are millions of brands out there jostling for your attention. And in the particular field of learning, there are hundreds, perhaps even thousands. If there's nothing inherently memorable about yours, if there's nothing distinctive, it'll disappear into the pack. And that's the difference between between being the star up there on the stage, the main attraction, Mr. Meatloaf, or just being another face in the crowd. Crowd being on the next slide, Martin. So well-differentiated brands with a strong personality have a real pull for the people who respond to that personality. And it doesn't have to be everyone, remember, like Marmite, just the people who really like and need that stuff. But bland, generic brands don't. And trying to appeal to everybody can make you bland and generic. And the point about this really is that push in marketing costs a lot more than pull. If you have the pull, if you have a charismatic brand, people basically will come to you. They'll visit the Apple store. They'll go to the Nike shop. They'll go to your websites. They'll come along at this time of year to see what Apple is launching in terms of the new phones and so on, because that brand has pull. If you're not in that position as a brand, you're constantly out there pushing information at people, trying to sell to them. And the pushing goes on day after day, and you have to keep it up because as soon as you stop pushing, the sales drop off. There's no inherent pull to you. So push in marketing costs a lot more than pull. So if your brand is dull and uninspiring, it's basically going to cost you a lot more money or a lot more time and attention to get any traction. And you'll have to do that on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. I'd just like to give an example here of a website design project that I was involved in to kind of bring it down to a practical level. And I'd have to say that I didn't have any responsibility for this. I was there as part of a large corporate. I was representing one business unit and the least important business unit. And there were a lot of very kind of powerful people with big sales targets and achievements around the room in this boardroom. And people were flashing up slides, screen grabs of competitor websites on the screen and saying, well, what do we like about this one? What do we don't like about it? Do we like this functionality? Oh, I like that little bit there where the movie comes up. Oh, I like the parallel scrolling on that website. And they were doing this with the aim of deciding what our corporate website was going to look like. Everyone in the group was going to have to use. So when they'd come to a decision about this, what they liked, what they didn't like, they then kind of boiled that down and turned it into a brief for a big, expensive web design company based in the States, who spent months and months developing a site, thousands and thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. And in the end, nobody liked and was practically unusable from the point of view of my business unit. So what we did is refuse to participate in it, went off and built our own with a very good web development company around the corner. Cost us about 10 grand, which is kind of peanuts by web design standards. And everybody loved it. And then after about a year, the rest of the organization was coming to us and saying, well, you know, how did you do this? Could you do something like this for us, possibly? Because we hate our website. Nobody likes it. The clients don't like it. But the point is they'd really got the process the wrong way round there. The ass about face, so to speak. They'd looked at the competitors first before they looked at what their punters actually wanted. So I'm going to give a kind of obverse example to that by talking about a brand development program that I was involved in. So we go to the next slide. This was a product called MeTime. I had the responsibility for creating this in a very short time span, and it was a very tough brief. The brief from our bold and fearless business unit leader whose favourite word was disruption, was to create a brand that was for the learner, not for the L&D person, a consumer-grade brand experience with no compromise. Because what we'd identified was that in a lot of learning brands, there is a three-cornered fight between the learner, the vendor or designer, and the learning and development person. And what happens is, that sense of purpose gets slightly confused, because you say, well, who is the person who's going to sign the checkbook at the end of the day? Well, it's the head of L&D, or it's the head of HR. So that is the person that we're going to design for. And what you end up with is basically an administration design, a design made for an administrator. Meanwhile, the poor learner who has to actually use the stuff is kind of very low down on the pecking order when it comes to making those decisions. So with this, we thought, just as an experiment, let's kind of get out of that three-cornered fight. Let's create something that is particularly for the learner. So what we did is we went and talked to a load of them, and we'd come up with this name Me Time, because it was supposed to be about self-directed learners. We'd written a few white papers about it. One of them was called Me Time, which I wrote, which is why we used that name. And we didn't ask these people, employees of companies, we didn't ask them anything about learning or learning and development or LMSs. We just asked them about Me Time. We said, what does Me Time mean to you? And the answers that came back were really fascinating and counterintuitive in a way. And they were saying things like, they talk about things like, well, I like going on Tough Mudder races, or jogging, or sailing, or taking the dogs for a walk, whatever. But they also said, what I really love is a project that I can pursue and just do that, not think about anything else. Not have to answer emails in the middle of it, or be called away to a meeting, or even to be called away to do the washing up at home. Just the idea of being able to focus on one thing for 2-3 hours at a time is the biggest luxury, because I never get that in life. And that spontaneously, without even bringing up the idea of learning, I thought was really interesting to us. And loads of other insights came out of it, which I can't list, because I no longer work with this brand. I don't have the IP, so I can't show you all the slides in the draft brand book, as much as I'd love to. But out of this, we constructed a brand that we knew would appeal to these people, and we had a lot of lifestyle photography, and we tested it continually on the users, on people in this learner position. Said, what do you think of this? Does this feel like you? Would this turn you off, or would this turn you on? And basically that was how we built the brand. And that's completely the other way around, I think, from what was happening in that room when people were looking at their competitors' slides. Of course, we looked at the competition, but what we realized in the end is we didn't have any competition, because nobody else built a brand like this. And when we launched the product, one industry analyst told us off the bat, this is the only piece of innovation he'd seen in the learning technologies area for the last 5 years. We couldn't make him go on the record about that, but there you go. So it was a very successful initiative. As I say, I no longer work there. So that's, I think, brings me to a point where it'd be good to take some questions if we've got any in the chat.
John, can I just start with a question? Because it was just about this. So differentiation, right? You put out a big slide, a slide with many logos on it, and if one goes to learning technologies, it's a bun fight. There's a massive hall with hundreds of suppliers. What is it? I mean, you talked about being able to pull people to your brand. What is it? If I'm sitting here and I'm one of those people in that room, what do I have to do? What are the sort of steps I have to take to start getting noticed and really standing out from the crowd?
Well, it's an interesting it's an interesting example you bring up there, because I worked for a company a while ago, Lemes, and the MD said, I'm not going to go to learning technologies because I'm just one in a million logos there. I'm just not going to go. So I said, well, you can't not go, because that's January or February, everybody goes to that show, and they kind of gather a lot of information and knowledge that they'll use throughout the year. If they're buying decisions, you can't not be there. So what we decided to do in the end was we hired a little hotel over the road from the venue, and we started something called the Learning Lounge and invited people to that, and said, look, don't go to that horribly uncomfortable place where there's nowhere to sit down and you can't get a decent cup of coffee. Come to this hotel, have nice stuff to eat and drink, a comfortable place to sit down and a sofa and a chat. We'll show you some maybe VR demos and things like that you can do, but in a less frantic kind of context. And people really loved it. And I think the first year we had about 40 people, and then the next year we did it bigger and better, added our own conference and doubled those numbers, more than doubled those numbers. And then the year after that, we got an even bigger venue, and we added extra bells and whistles and experience zone, blah, blah, blah. So we started iteratively built it up. And it worked fantastically well. And what we've done there is completely refusing to do what everybody else did. You know, as ad agencies say, when they zig, you zag. So that's one way of looking at it. I mean, that's a kind of guerrilla approach, and you really need to be fairly brave and bold if you're going to take that approach to stuff. But really standing out can have great dividends.
And if you don't have that kind of budget, because what you've described there is a fairly big budget response, isn't it?
Well, no. I mean, the first year it was a lot cheaper than going there. You know, bear in mind, it's extremely expensive to go to those exhibitions. This was the whole point of it. You know, my decision. You know, my boss there was saying, "I'm going to spend all this money. What do I get for it?" You know, 50 fairly dubious leads that don't turn into business. Which is not to say that learning technologies doesn't produce leads for some companies. It's just, but it works for some companies, not for others. It's a bit of a funny thing. We spent a lot less money and got much bigger results in the route that we took. Eventually, we did build up the budget year on year because we were getting return on it. You know, I think everything I'd done has been bootstrapped like that. That you know, to justify carrying on with the experiment, pushing it out bigger and better, if you make money. Yeah, it makes sense to do it. If you don't, well, can it and give in and just get a better stand.
So we had a question from Meg, and Meg, thanks for this question. I think it's really goes to the heart of, you know, the challenges within organisations for L&D teams. Where do you start with internal stakeholders who are feeling conservative about doing something differently? Do you try and demonstrate by doing, or do you convince them first?
Well, sorry, wishy-washy answer. It depends on the situation and the person. I mean, some people will be so conservative and doubting and not have the trust that it's very difficult to talk them around just in words. So what you would want to do is go off and do a little under-the-radar pilot where you could prove that your approach worked. If you can do something like that at smaller scale and say, look, these people like this and it worked for them and we got results for this. So there's proof. Data, you know, you have to rely on data. I mean, one way that marketing people are luckier than learning people is that they tend to have a lot more data. Marketing people nowadays have data coming out of their ears, you know, and that enables you to build business cases. Learning people tend to have a bit less, but you know that's gradually changing. You know, there's a whole world now opening up of data that people can have to construct arguments. But I think it's either you use your best rhetorical and persuasion techniques on people, but if that doesn't work, then you go off and do something and prove that it worked. I think it's probably the best approach. I don't know. I hope that's helpful.
It's interesting. I think that's useful, John. Also, I would add that I did a session learning technologies this summer, And I was taken by the fact that I asked a question in the room, was like, well, who is trying to do something differently within the organization, but is finding that the organization, it's really hard to convince people about doing things differently. And pretty much everyone in the room put their hand up. So actually there seems to be, I get the feeling there's a big desire to do things differently, but actually there is just a big challenge to bring people together around what that might look like. So I think that idea of, I think they're great tips. You have to use the data, and you have to be able to try something out. And I would just add to that, or you get those stakeholders together and discuss a bit, maybe a kind of higher level, how L&D is changing. Because it seems to, I don't know what you think about that, but this idea of just educating people as well, is that is a sort of brand thing as well, isn't it? It's not, you've got something new. How do you convince people that it's the right thing to do?
Yeah, I think it is about starting from the inside out as well. Winning those arguments is about kind of building a story internally within the organization of trust and success. As I say, if you can win kind of small successes that turn people's heads around internally, that can start to change things. But it's also kind of working on, an internal brand, like a marketing team, for instance, could have an internal brand. I think we did a bit of this in one of my companies. We said, well, let's stop talking about the marketing team because we're agile. So there's no marketing team anymore. There's no marketing budget. So what are we? And we invented a kind of internal brand called Llama, which we said was an acronym, and it's completely made up, but we just had a lovely picture of a llama, fluffy llama. And we would use this image to identify what we were trying to do with a cross-functional team at the time. So that was a bit of, starting with brand as the beginning of your thinking point. I think you see this sometimes when a new person comes into an organization who is a change agent and is billed as the person who's going to turn stuff round. Very often, if it's going to be, I've seen this happen quite a lot of times, and it's been a real failure. But often a person will come in and they have a personal brand. They have kind of a reputation that precedes them, that builds trust. Oh yeah, he's the guy or she's the woman who is going to make people feel differently about this, And in a new role, you do have kind of like perhaps 3 months where you can make a real impact and convince people that things will change. 3 months to make, some massive errors that you'll then have to climb back from perhaps. But using that honeymoon period in a new role I think is really important.
And how,
sorry, I rambled slightly there, but,
That's great, John. So just picking up on that, where does customer voice come into? Because you talked about trust and success.
Yeah.
So whether you're internal or whether you're an external supplier, you have to be able to build trust with your stakeholders.
Yeah.
And your customers or prospects.
Yeah.
Surely one way to do that is to, have your customers advocate on your behalf, and have their voice in what you talk about. How important is that? Should you be putting them full center of your marketing, just rather than buying from the brand, you're buying from someone, someone else is saying, these people do these wonderful things for us, so therefore, as a customer, I'd be looking at that going, well, if you can do that for them, I'd like to buy some of that. How important is that?
Well, there is a diagram I don't have on this slide, unfortunately, but could bring into this called the relationship ladder, which is a fairly old-fashioned marketing thing where you turn people from kind of suspects to prospects to buyers to clients and then to advocates at the end of that. And that's a useful thing. To talk specifically about the learning market, I think because I've been in learning technologies for quite a while, going back a way, it was always the case that it was a small company selling to a bigger company. And there was a lot of distrust from clients of the e-learning companies, I think, around the time of the noughties. I mean, that's changed a lot since, because you'll have people who go from one side of the fence to the other. They become heads of L&D after having been at e-learning companies, or else they get fed up of being a head of an L&D and go and start their own learning technologies consultancy or whatever, and things have eased up. But at first, we faced an awful lot of difficulty when we tried to get client advocates, because in some cases you couldn't even talk to them. As a marketing person within a learning company, you couldn't just kind of ring up the head of learning at AstraZeneca or whatever and say, would you like to come for a think tank dinner? They were kind of unapproachable, and salespeople struggled to get personal contacts with these people. It's all changed a bit. So a lot of my career within learning technologies has kind of been about breaking down that barrier. And I think the way we did that was through thought leadership. First of all, if you're trying to sell to people, it's much easier if the first contact you have is that you give them something, something of value, something they want. And this was the kind of early genesis of content marketing. Epic, we created sort of 40 white papers that were valued because they were written by Donald Clark, who knew what he was talking about, and all the rest of it, and edited by me. And those were useful calling cards, because who are you? Don't we know you're from Adam, who's his company Epic? Oh yeah, you've given me something. So that's the beginning, the basic beginning of our relationship. Then as time went on, we kind of had these think tank dinners where you'd get people in a restaurant around a table going to discuss issues of the day around learning, compliance, personalization, all that sort of stuff. Then write it out and shut up under Chatham House rules as a report. But just the events themselves brought two sides together in an unpressured way, and they could see that it was a way of building trust in a room. And there are a lot of other techniques and events and conferences and what have you now. And it's all about building trust. As a supplier, you have to build trust with your clients, and you also have to find to what extent you can trust them.
So what's about this kind of features first approach that seems to predominate in the market?
Certainly in the platform technologies market, yeah.
So, there's a push on features,
and
remarkably little about the kind of problems that they're solving and the solutions they provide. So what's your view on that in terms of differentiation? There seems to be very little differentiation. There's a features list that most technology companies now have. So what do you do about that?
Well, marketing kind of best practice is you sell on benefits, not features. In practice, depending on who's buying, what they're buying it for, people will look at features lists. People, marketing is a buying function, which I think does tend to, because everything in marketing involves spending money at some level. So you have to be quite a canny buyer to be a head of marketing. So you spend a lot of time comparing features lists, and I like this. We were talking earlier, weren't we, Martin, about the Zoom platform versus Skype versus other basic things, and you'll do those kind of features comparisons and so on. So features comparisons are a part of the sale, but when it comes to probably the next major purchase I've got to make is to buy a new computer. I'm afraid I'm an Apple fanboy. I'm so bought into it that I'm not going to look at Windows. I'm going to kind of look at the features of the new product. But my engagement with the brand means that it's not a straight features comparison. And I think this is also true with a lot of learning products and platforms. Because it's all very well if you kind of, you do your features comparison, you find the one that's got the best features for the best price, And then a year after you've implemented, the company goes tits up, and you've got a load of junk on your hands that will just age extremely badly, is not supported, and all the rest of it. So, you'll want to look that supplier in the white of the eyes and make sure they're going to be around for a while. They're going to be stable. They're going to give you the customer support you need. They're going to answer your questions. They're going to answer your stupid questions without making you feel stupid. That you can have a relationship with these people that's going to keep the thing running. And a lot of that work is done for you with brand. I think if you have a reputation in the market as having outstanding customer service, it's going to make you, it's going to make the features comparison less important, I think. So, I mean, brand leverages everything, really.
Yeah.
And it wins over cost. Because if you don't have a decent brand, let's face it, you're only going to be bought on cost. So you will be forced down in your pricing again and again. With a great brand, you can add a premium. And the company that is both value for money and cheap, but also has an amazing brand, I think is going to win.
So do you, if you were to mark the industry out of 10 currently for, how effective these brands are, in terms of the way you talked about it today. So where do you think the market is just generally out of 10, 10 being excellent?
This is a really difficult one. You put me on the spot here, because occasionally try to get work for these people. I'd say overall probably about 7 in that adequate. In that there's a lot more. The companies are bigger now. The vendor companies are bigger now. There's more marketing money in there. There are a lot of people coming in from other sectors who really know their stuff. There's a lot of very good marketing people around there. But I do find that the brands are still very samey. Because I for various reasons, I end up scooting around a lot of vendor websites. And I usually know where everything is in terms of usability, because they all use, it was WordPress or Drupal. They're all very much of a muchness. They all look very much the same. I do see examples of companies that really stand out by taking a different approach. A little while ago, there was a company whose name escapes me, who had 2 stands at Learning Technologies. One was a stand which was all covered in sort of accident scene tape and was called Boring E-Learning. And you went there was just a load of there was a smashed up stand basically. And you looked at this, thought, what's the point of that? And then opposite the aisle was the company's actual stand, and they said, "Don't fall for boring e-learning, come for us." And everything that they did was around this basic basic trope, and was fantastically successful. And pretty soon they sold the company. I remember who they sold the company to, not the name of the company, but I'm not going to say it. And they basically diluted and kind of emasculated that brand. But it had started off great, by doing something really revolutionary and guerrilla. There are other people I can point to who have absolutely great customer service. Everybody in the company lives the values, walks and talks the values without being cheesy. You love interfacing with that company at every level. But graphically, they're a bit bland. If you can bring those 2 things into alignment, and get and get designs which are really as good as the actual spirit and ethos of the company, you've got an absolute winner there. But most people are falling down on one or the other. They either look great, don't live up to it, or they look less great than they ought to.
Yeah.
Or else they look budget and they're actually incredibly expensive. Things are kind of out of alignment there. So I'm giving 7 out of 10 because I think that they're all doing really well on marketing. They're falling down on brand in many cases.
Yeah. Okay. So we don't have any more questions. So unless anyone has a question, please ask it now, because I'm just going to let John plug what is on the screen and what has been on the screen. So John Gunn, tell us a little bit about that before we go.
Thank you. I won't go on at length about it, but this week I launched my podcast, which I've been talking about for a long time. The first episode is out there. It's basically about me talking to the people and technologies and about the technologies that are creating the future of learning. And the first episode is an interview with Sam Watts, who knows more than anybody I know about virtual reality and how it can be used for learning. Really interesting story about helping blind veterans to see with virtual reality, examination of data and the issues around that. Many people don't realize that virtual reality is an incredibly data-rich interaction. And the next episode, relevantly with this webinar we're talking about today, is all about marketing. I'm talking to a couple of marketing people who are also learning technologies people, Cheryl Clemens and Steve Rayson, and we're talking about what marketing skills can be used within learning, and we're talking quite a bit about brand. And then after that, I've got Nick Shackleton-Jones, and then a whole load of people are queuing up to be on this. So go and get it wherever you get your podcasts from, subscribe and like. It's a major project for me, and I'm doing it off my own bat. It's completely independent. So I really hope you enjoy it.
Great. So when is the marketing one coming out? Is that out yet?
2 weeks' time.
Okay.
Slightly under 2 weeks' time.
So that sounds like it's going to follow on really well from this discussion today. So
yeah.
So great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think it's all, we haven't had any more questions, not that I'm aware of. So I think let me just check. Yeah, no. So I think we can draw, there was the question slide. I'll ask this question if everyone is still, did this meet your expectations? I'll give you 2 minutes quickly to answer that. But when we asked this at the start, we didn't get any answers. So either I've made a massive error with the way the chat's working. I know that at least one person's had a slight problem with it. Or maybe people don't want to share that answer, which is absolutely fine. So if that isn't the case, then John, I would like to say a huge thank you for putting this together and for your time today. Really enjoyed your insights, and actually I'm really excited to hear that you're doing a podcast episode all about this subject with people in marketing and in learning. So it kind of it's really worth going to that next, by the sounds of it.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the time, for letting me come along and burble on and shamelessly plug my podcast. And good luck with all the next ones to come. And hi from Megan. Hi to Megan Toogood, by the way. I used to work with you, Megan, I think. So great to see you again.
Yes, she said thank you. So look, everyone, we've managed to. I think we're within an hour. So I'm hoping that was useful. This has been the third in our sort of fairly irregular series of webinars around. We've done content marketing, PR. Now doing brand and differentiation, and I'm sure we will do another topic in this area in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. But I hope you have a good rest of the day. And John and everyone, thank you very much. And we'll see you.
Thank you. Bye.